14 below zero on a Montana ridge, and a woman who hasn't missed in 3 years just missed. Then a stranger appears behind her. No footsteps, no warning. He opens a rifle case and steps back, and carved into the stock are 4 words in her father's handwriting. Father she buried 3 years ago, in an empty box. The father the government swore was dead. He wasn't dead, he was alive, in a facility that doesn't exist, held by the man he once trusted most. And somewhere in a sealed file, a single line, scheduled closure. 19 days. Now she is 13. A woman in a cracked lens cardigan who watched her for 9 months. A retired SEAL who was warned she was coming. A traitor whose voice breaks on the word sorry. A breach that takes 38 seconds. And an alarm that fires from inside. And then a field in the dark. A father walking toward freedom. A daughter with the perfect shot lined up on the man who stole everything. Her finger on the trigger. The most powerful man in the room in her crosshairs. And the hardest decision of her life is whether to pull it. She missed 1,912 meters, a steel plate the size of a dinner tray, wind from the northwest at 11 miles per hour, steady, honest, the kind of wind that doesn't shift its mind at the last second or lie about where it's going or change the rules halfway through. And she missed. The sound of nothing is its own kind of sound. No ring of metal bouncing off granite. No distant clang rolling through the canyon below. Just the muffled crack of the shot going out into the dark, and then silence coming back like an answer she didn't ask for and didn't want. Nora Vasquez Callahan pressed her cheek back against the stock, blinked once, looked through the scope again at the steel plate still standing on the far ridge. Untouched, not swinging, not dented. Just standing there in the gray Montana pre-dawn like it had somewhere better to be and was simply waiting for her to finish embarrassing herself. She hadn't missed in 3 years, not once. Not at 900 meters in a crosswind outside Reno. Not at 1,400 meters in the dark outside Bozeman with her left hand going numb from the cold. Not at 1,100 meters in the rain when she was 24, and her father was still a phone call away. And the world still operated by rules she could predict. Not once. Until now, the temperature on the ridge was 14 below zero. Her breath came in small controlled puffs, each one deliberate, each one timed between heartbeats the way her father had taught her when she was 9 years old. And the rifle was bigger than she was, and he'd knelt behind her on a West Texas morning that smelled like cedar and cold dirt and said, "The gun doesn't know you're nervous, so don't tell it." Her fingers weren't cold. She'd trained for cold. She'd trained in worse than this, in conditions that made this ridge feel like a suggestion of winter rather than the real thing. The problem wasn't temperature. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't elevation or hour, or the fact that she'd been lying on this granite for 43 minutes before she pulled the trigger. The problem was the barrel. She had known it before she fired. Had known it for 6 weeks. 4,200 rounds through a Remington 700 she'd built herself, modified herself, carried in the back of a borrowed truck across 4 states and 3 mountain ranges through 2 winters. A rifle that knew her heartbeat the way her own body did. She trusted more than most people she had met in the last 3 years. The rifling was gone in the last 3 inches of bore. Accuracy degraded past 1,600 meters. She'd been compensating. Adjusting her holds without consciously deciding to. Telling herself she had another few hundred rounds before it mattered. It mattered now. She exhaled, slow, all the way to the bottom of it. Lay still on the cold granite and let the failure settle over her the way snow settles, quietly, without drama, without asking permission. Because that's what her father had taught her about failure too. Don't perform it. Just feel it. Then do something about it. She started to reach for the bolt, barrels shot. She didn't move. Not the rifle. Not her hand. Not her head. Not even her eyes behind the scope, because the voice came from behind her. 8 feet, maybe 10. And she had not heard a single footstep on this ridge. Not the crunch of gravel, not the shift of weight on loose stone, not one sound that didn't belong to the wind. She had been lying here for 43 minutes, and she had swept her perimeter 3 times before settling in, and there had been nobody within a quarter mile of her position. And yet a man's voice, low, not loud, particular low of a voice that has never needed volume to be heard, has been since round 3,800, if I had to guess. She turned over slowly. Because fast would have told him something. And she wasn't ready to tell him anything yet. So she turned over slowly, sat up on the granite and looked at the man standing 8 feet behind her like he'd been there all morning. Like the ridge was his and he'd been generous enough to share it. Older, 60, maybe 61. 6'2", the kind of build that used to be larger. You could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way they sat like they were made for weight that wasn't there anymore. Hair gray and cut close to the skull. Face that had the particular quality that comes not from age but from years of being outside, in conditions that disagreed with human skin and lost every single argument. His eyes were the color of the granite around them. Gray with a little green caught in it. Kind of eyes that catalog everything and file it without losing anything. Canvas jacket. Nothing military about it. No patches, no rank, no indication of anything at all. But the way he stood said everything she needed to know. She wasn't saying it out loud yet. "Who are you?" she said. He looked at her the way you look at something when you're calculating what it can do. Not the up-down assessment she had learned to ignore by 22. This was different. This was structural, like reading load capacity on a bridge before you decide whether to cross it. Nobody in particular, he said. Nobody in particular walked up a Class 4 ridge in the dark. He glanced down at the drop behind her. At the valley floor 1,200 feet below, back at her. "It's not that steep," he said, which, it was extremely steep. She had checked the approach on satellite imagery 3 separate times before choosing this position precisely because it would deter anyone who didn't know what they were doing. She looked at her barrel, looked at him, looked at the barrel. He'd known the round count, which meant he'd been watching her work longer than the last few minutes, which meant he'd been on this ridge before she arrived, which meant he'd let her get set up and run her shot and miss and only then spoken. "Why, how long have you been up here?" she said. "Long enough," he said. She filed him. The weight distribution, neither leg locked, both hands loose at his sides, specific posture of a man who has stood in uncertain terrain for so many thousands of hours, that uncertain terrain stopped registering as uncertain somewhere around his mid-30s. The way he watched the approaches without looking like he was watching them. He turned toward the tree line at the north end of the ridge. "Give me 2 minutes," he said. She should have left. Correct response to an unknown contact appearing on an isolated ridge. Leave immediately. Create distance. Reassess from somewhere defensible. She had run this logic before in situations considerably less ambiguous than this one. She did not leave. She sat on the cold granite and watched the tree line and waited 2 full minutes. She didn't know exactly why, except that the architecture of how this man occupied space was something she recognized. Not him. Not his face. The pattern of how he existed in a location, like a man who had retired from something, but had not retired from being the thing that did that something. Who checked exits without appearing to check them. Who registered every sound without appearing to register anything at all. Her father moved like that, every day of her life until she was 22. In the way he made coffee, the way he locked the front door and checked it twice without breaking stride, the way he stood in ordinary places like parking lots and grocery stores and spent 3 careful seconds reading what everyone else walked past without seeing. The man came back from the tree line carrying a black case. Long and flat. She knew exactly what kind of case. Set it on the granite between them. Unlatched it, lifted the lid, and stepped back. She felt her hands go still in a way that was not discipline. The kind of still that is shock moving through your body before your brain is finished catching up. Inside the case, a Macmillan TAC 338, bolt action. .338 Lapua Magnum hand-fitted stock. Trigger work done by someone who truly understood what a trigger was for. The kind of rifle that takes months to build right and years to build perfectly. And this one had been built perfectly, and then kept. With the kind of sustained attention that means something beyond maintenance. That means someone cared about this object the way you care about things that are connected to people. Olive drab stock. Matte finish on the metal. No exterior markings, except one left side of the stock. Just below where a cheek would rest. Small, deliberately small. 3 characters and a dash and 4 words. The rifle remembers. She stopped breathing 3 seconds. That was how long it took for her brain to process what her eyes were delivering. 3 seconds where the wind and the cold and the pewter gray Montana sky above the canyon and all went completely away, and there was nothing in the world except 4 words in a handwriting she would recognize anywhere, any surface, any light, any condition. She had seen that handwriting on birthday cards left on the kitchen counter, on the margin of a topographic map when she was 12, and he was teaching her to read terrain the way soldiers read it, not as landscape but as intention, on a note tucked into her first-year college care package that said only, "Remember the grass at the base of the target. Not where you are, where the bullet is going." J.C. James Callahan, her father. She looked up at the man. He was watching her with those gray-green eyes and his expression had not changed. but something behind it had shifted, the way light shifts behind frosted glass. You can't see the source, but you know it moved. He had known exactly what she would see when he opened this case. He had known what those 4 words would do to her, which meant he had known exactly who she was before she arrived on this ridge. "Where did you get this?" she said. Vocal steadiness cost something. She paid it. He didn't answer the where. He said, "Your father had a specific way of reading wind at distance. Never used flags or meters or any of the tools. Used the grass at the base of the target. Not where he was lying, where the bullet was going. Said you could read the wind's intention better from its destination than from its origin." She had not heard anyone say that in 3 years. She had not heard anyone say that since the last time her father said it to her. She looked back at the rifle, at the 4 words, at the handwriting she would know in the dark with her eyes closed. "Try mine," the man said. "See how she sits," and he stepped back. She shouldn't have picked it up. Rational response. You don't pick up a stranger's rifle on an isolated mountain ridge when you have no idea who he is or why he has an object that belongs to your missing father. You don't do that. That is not a thing you do. She picked it up. The weight was right. 12.5 pounds with the scope. The stock came against her shoulder like something that had been waiting for exactly this shoulder, which made no sense. This rifle had been built for a person with a different frame, different draw length, different proportions entirely, but it didn't feel like that. She got into position, cheek to stock, eye to scope, crosshairs finding the steel plate on the far ridge, 1,912 meters away. Wind the same, northwest. 11 miles, steady and completely honest about where it was going. She found her breath. In, slow. Hold at the bottom, let the heartbeat pass. And the next one. In the quarter second of absolute stillness that lives between beats, fraction of a moment where nothing is moving, not even your blood. She squeezed. The shot broke clean and complete. And across the canyon the steel plate rang like a church bell struck by someone who meant it. One shot. 1,912 meters. First round. She didn't move from the stock immediately. Stayed with the rifle. Let the echo work its way up the granite walls of the canyon below and come back to her. And she felt something move through her chest that she did not have a name for, and was not going to examine right now, because there were other things that needed examining first, and they were considerably more urgent. She sat up, cleared the bolt, the rifle across her knees. "Your father taught me that shot," the man said. 2003. He was the shooter and I was spotting, and we sat on a roof for 11 hours in 43 degrees, and he never once complained about the heat. Just kept reading the grass at the base of the targets. He paused. Not for effect. The pause of a man organizing what is actually true rather than what is memorable. "I never got as good at it as he was," he said. "But I got to competent." She looked at him. "Who are you?" she said. "Different from before. Different weight and different meaning," and he could hear the difference. "Aldous Briggs." He said, "Master Chief. Retired. SEAL Team 6. Your father and I served together for 9 years. She ran that name through everything she had assembled in 29 months. Every document, every margin notation, every name she'd found in places she wasn't supposed to be finding names. Aldous Briggs. She had seen it. Twice. Documents it had taken her 4 months to locate and 3 more weeks to read properly. Not prominently, in the margin of a 2019 operational summary and in a contact roster from 2017 that she'd spent 6 weeks reconstructing from fragments. "You were there," he said. "I was there for a lot of things," he said. "For all of it." He looked at the far ridge, at the plate that was still faintly moving from the impact. "For enough of it," he said. The wind came across the granite, cold and steady and honest. She looked at the inscription on the stock across her knees. At the 4 words in her father's handwriting. "Tell me something else," he said, she said. "Something you wouldn't know unless you were actually there." He looked at her for a long moment. He used to say, Briggs said, that the most dangerous thing you could do in the field was start believing your own assessment of the situation. That you had to keep asking the question even after you thought you had the answer. Because the situation was always changing and you were always a few seconds behind it. She was quiet because that was exactly right. That was her father exactly. Not the words but the thinking underneath them. The particular discipline of a man who distrusted certainty so thoroughly that he'd built the distrust into every decision he made. "Okay," she said. She stood up, picked up the TAC 338. "The case, I'll carry this," she said. "Where are we going?" He looked at her, at the rifle in her hands, at the way she was holding it, not carefully, the way you hold something unfamiliar or precious. Naturally. The way you hold something that belongs to you. Something in his face settled. North, he said. 4 miles. There's a cabin, she nodded once they started moving. Down the far side of the granite ridge and into the trees, single file, no words. The Montana sky above them was going from black to the first gray of pre-dawn. The cold was absolute and honest. Her left knee registered its familiar complaint, and she registered it and moved through it. The rifle was in her hands. The 4 words were on its stock. And she was finally moving towards something, instead of away from nothing. The cabin was 4 miles north of the ridge, down one face of the mountain and partway up another. He had built it himself. She could tell from the construction. The kind of structure that happens when someone has abundant time and limited materials and very specific ideas about how load-bearing walls should work. Everything functional. Nothing decorative. Every decision made in service of the building lasting. Inside, a wood stove with a fire that had been going for hours. 2 chairs with the specific wear of being sat in by the same person over a long period of time. A table. A shelf of topographic maps organized by region and then by year within each region. A radio she didn't recognize the frequency configuration of. A locked cabinet against the back wall. Dark metal, the kind designed not to look significant. She noted the cabinet, did not comment on it. He made coffee on the wood stove. Real coffee, not instant. Percolated in an aluminum pot that had been percolating coffee for at least a decade. The kind that takes 12 minutes and rewards you properly. She sat in one of the chairs and kept the TAC 338 across her knees. She knew this was not entirely rational. She did it anyway. Because the rifle was the most real thing that had happened in 29 months, and she was not ready to put it down. Outside the cabin windows, the Montana sky had gone the color of old pewter, and the wind had picked up, and the first serious suggestion of snow was moving in from the north. The fire had been going for hours, which meant Briggs had been up before she arrived on the ridge, which meant he'd been expecting this morning. He poured 2 mugs, set one in front of her, sat down across the table. "How long?" he said. "Have you been looking?" "Since the memorial service," she said. The one with the empty box. He held his mug in both hands. 29 months, he said. 29 months and 11 days, she said. Because she had been counting. Because counting was the kind of precision you applied when everything else had stopped being controllable. He looked at the rifle across her knees. At the inscription, "Your father would be annoyed you dropped out of school," he said. "Father would be more annoyed the government told me he was dead," she said. A beat. "Just long enough, fair," he said. She reached inside her jacket, produced a folded set of papers, handwritten, dense, fined over many months into something that contained no unnecessary word. She put them on the table. 3 things, she said. He looked at the papers. Did not reach for them first. No body was returned. Official report cites the chaos of the August 2021 withdrawal. But I cross-referenced every American service member recovered or designated unrecoverable during that period. Everyone. The unrecoverable ones all have geographic coordinate and corresponding incident reports filed within 72 hours. My father has no incident report, no coordinates. He has a date, a checkbox, signature from someone who appears to have never left a desk during the relevant period, his thumb pressed against the side of his mug. Once, very slightly. He was listening differently now. Second, a man named Warren Delacroix sent me a text message on 14th, 2022. 4 words. He didn't die there. Warren Delacroix was SEAL Team 6, served with my father from 2015 to 2019. 6 weeks after sending that message, he was reported missing during a solo camping trip in Oregon. He has not been found. Now she could see it. The minimal tightening of his jaw. The kind of response a man produces when he hears something confirmed that he had not wanted confirmed. He knew Warren Delacroix. Knew him with enough closeness to have a physical reaction. Third, she pulled 1 page from the others, placed it in front of him where he could read it without touching it. Partial document from a batch of classified materials leaked through a congressional staffer's personal email account in February 2022. Most was redacted before it circulated. This section wasn't. It's a detainee status list. No addresses, no facility names, just designations and statuses. Look at line 37, he looked. She watched his face while he read. The jaw tightened again, one small structural response he couldn't completely suppress. Not emotion. Confirmation line 37, JR. Active detainee, not killed in action, not missing in action, not the gray bureaucratic space of unrecovered detainee. He's alive, she said. He has been alive this entire time. Someone has him. Someone is keeping him. Someone made the official record say something completely different. Briggs set the page down. Very carefully. The way you set things down when your hands want to do something that would be a mistake. The wood stove ticked. The snow started against the windows. Not heavy yet. Just the beginning of a conversation. How did you find me, he said. 4 months building toward a location, she said. Your name appeared twice in documents I shouldn't have been able to access. I worked toward it. He was quiet for a moment. Long enough to mean something. You didn't find me, he said. Not entirely on your own. She felt the air in the cabin change. Not a sound. Not a movement. A change in pressure, like the atmosphere adjusting before serious weather arrives. What does that mean? She said. It means I received a message 12 days ago, he said. Encrypted sentence. She's commensurable. The fire cracked in the stove. You had the rifle waiting, she said, working through it out loud. In the case. Ready. Before I got here. Yes, you knew I would recognize it. I was told you would. Who told you? He looked at her steadily with those gray-green eyes. I don't know, he said. The message was routed through relay points I couldn't backtrack. But whoever sent it knew your name. Knew this location, which nobody knows, and knew about the rifle. She sat with that. Someone had been watching her for months. Someone who had access to this man's location, which she was understanding was not a location that was easy to know. Who knew about the rifle? Who had engineered this morning? This conversation, this cabin, this table. She had believed she was the one doing the finding. I don't like being managed, she said. Nobody does, he said. Doesn't change what's in front of us. She looked at the papers on the table. At line 37, she looked at the locked cabinet against the back wall for the third time. He noticed. Go ahead, he said. She walked to it. The lock was a 4-digit combination built into the door itself. Not a padlock, not a separate mechanism. Kind chosen when you want the cabinet to look like part of the wall, rather than a vault standing in a room. She didn't touch it. Just looked at the dimensions, at the way it sat flush against the wood, the lack of dust on its face that told you it had been accessed recently. What's in it, she said. Documents, he said. Some physical records I couldn't trust to any digital system. Some photographs from operations that were never officially documented. And one envelope I've been keeping sealed since 2021 because I wasn't sure who to give it to. She turned from the cabinet and looked at him. Your father left it with me, he said, in 2020. Before the reassignment, he said, something happens to me and it's not the kind of something that comes with a ceremony and a folded flag. Give this to whoever comes looking. But not to any institution, to a person. Someone who came looking because they couldn't stop looking. She was quiet. How many people came looking before me, she said. None, he said. You're the first. She looked at the cabinet. I don't want it yet, she said. He looked at her with some quality of recognition. No, he said. Not yet. When we have him back, she went back to the table, sat down, picked up the coffee. Tell me about the 9 years, she said. Not the missions. What he was like. Briggs organized what was actually true rather than what was memorable. Stubborn, he said. In a specific way. Not about what he wanted. He wasn't particularly attached to outcomes going his way. Stubborn about what was right. Once he had decided what was right in a given situation, you could not move him. Not with argument, and not with authority, and not with the kind of pressure that moves most people. He would hear you out completely. He would genuinely consider everything you said. And then he would do the right thing anyway. She recognized that. She had grown up inside that stubbornness. Had been frustrated by it 100 times, and had also been shaped by it in ways that were currently keeping her functional in a cabin in Montana, 3 years after the last time she'd heard his voice. He talked about you, Briggs said. She looked at him occasionally. When something reminded him, he looked at his mug. He talked about the first time you outshot him. You were 16. He said he hadn't expected it yet. Thought he had another year or two before it happened. When it happened, he said he felt 2 things simultaneously. Pride in something else he spent a while finding the word for. What was the word, she said. Continuity, Briggs said. He said it felt like continuity. Like the thing he'd been building would keep going. She put the coffee down. She had not cried in 29 months. She had made a decision, somewhere around month 3, that she was not going to cry until she had something to cry from relief about, rather than grief. She had been disciplined about that in the way her father had taught her to be disciplined about things that mattered. She was disciplined about it now. He was right, she said. About the continuity, yes, Briggs said. He was. She picked up the coffee, drank it. Very hot and very bitter and exactly what the moment required. The people who have him, she said. You know who they are. I have a strong suspicion, he said. Since when? He turned his mug in a slow circle on the table. Once. Twice. Since the day I received the call telling me James had been declared MIA, he said. Something about the call was wrong. The phrasing, the tone. The way the man on the other end was too careful about which words he used. You spend enough years in the field, you learn to hear the shape of what isn't being said, what wasn't being said, that it wasn't an accident, he said. That it was arranged, not tragedy, not chaos, not the fog of a difficult withdrawal in impossible conditions, a decision, made with intention and planning, and enough institutional power to make the official paperwork agree. Outside, the snow was coming down over the Montana mountains and building on the windowsills, and the fire was doing what fires do when the world outside has gone cold, burning steadily and without complaint. She looked at the inscription again. Father had not carved those 4 words as a motto, or a reminder or a piece of philosophy. She understood that now. He had carved them because they were true. Because he had learned over years and missions and every decision made behind this rifle that the record could say whatever it needed to say. The paperwork could say whatever someone with access chose to make it say. But the person who was there would remember. The rifle remembers what the records forgot. Pack light, Briggs said. We leave before sunrise. She did not say yes. She didn't need to. I'll drive, she said. They drove through the night. Nora drove. Briggs had said his eyes weren't good in the dark anymore, and she had believed him. Mostly. Except for the way he tracked every set of headlights that appeared behind them for more than 2 miles. The way he noted exit numbers without appearing to read signs. The way he shifted in the passenger seat at the Wyoming state line with the specific quality of a man confirming a position. His eyes were fine. She drove anyway, because it gave her something to do with her hands that wasn't thinking too far ahead of what she needed to think. The truck was a 2019 Ford F-250, dark blue. Montana plates from a county she didn't recognize. The heater worked well. The radio didn't work at all. Outside, the Montana snow gave way to Wyoming stars as the elevation dropped, and the sky opened up the way Wyoming sky opens in the deep middle of the night. Vast and indifferent and committed to showing you exactly how small you are in the geography of things. She didn't mind small. Small meant undetected. Undetected meant useful. The thing about driving through the night with someone who had known your father for 9 years was that you didn't have to explain the silences. She was accustomed to explaining her silences to people who didn't know why she had them. Who assumed silence was sadness or introversion or some social difficulty that could be addressed with enough gentle conversation, who didn't understand that some silences were operational, that something was happening inside them. She was building. What she knew, her father was alive. In a facility in Pennsylvania, with a date attached to his file that was 14 days away from when she'd read it and 8 days away now. What she needed, exact location, a plan, people she could trust with it, a position from which she could be the fact nobody had accounted for. What could cross the distance between those things? Teddy's access to the Virginia server. Briggs' operational knowledge, her own skill set which was real and specific and had been built over years of deliberate work in cold and dark and difficult terrain. What couldn't cross it? Speed. She could not make this faster than it was. She drove faster within the range of what was safe. Briggs slept for 90 minutes somewhere between Billings and Sheridan, or appeared to. Breathing pattern changed, but his right hand never fully relaxed from the door handle. So, not quite sleep. More like what happens when a body negotiates a partial truce with exhaustion while the mind refuses to fully stand down. The kind of rest that keeps the perimeter. He woke past Sheridan and looked at the road for a few minutes without speaking. Tell me about Teddy, Nora said. How you found her? She found me, he said. About a year ago. Left a note in a dead drop location I hadn't used in 4 years that only 3 people knew existed. You went. Of course I went. You trusted her. I trusted that she had found the dead drop, he said, which told me she was exceptional. And I trusted what she brought to the meeting. The documentation was real. The analysis was rigorous. She was careful to distinguish between what she could prove and what she suspected. He paused. The ones who are careful about what they claim are the ones worth trusting. She told me the truth when she didn't have to. Nora said. Yes, Briggs said. She did. Is that enough to make someone trustworthy? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Nothing is enough to make anyone trustworthy, he said finally. Trust isn't a conclusion you arrive at. It's a decision you keep making. You keep making it or you stop. He looked at the dark road. She's kept making it. So far, Nora said. So far, he agreed. That's all any of us gets. She drove through the Wyoming dark and thought about the word arranged and everything it contained. Someone had reached into the machinery of the United States government and moved one man from the column marked casualty to a column that didn't officially exist. Had smoothed everything over so cleanly that for 29 months and 11 days nobody found the seam. Someone had known she was coming. 12 days ahead. Had known Briggs' location, had known about the rifle, which meant the careful she thought she'd been doing was transparent from somewhere she couldn't see, which was, she filed that, put it in the column of problems to solve after the immediate problem. Because the immediate problem had a number attached to it, 29 months. And somewhere east of this highway, her father was in a room. The property sat 7 miles east of Sundance down a gravel road that hadn't seen maintenance in more than a decade. A rusted mailbox with no numbers, tree line. Then, a structure that had been a functioning ranch at some point and was now something quieter than that, heater and more purposeful. Lights on inside at 5:47 in the morning, which meant someone had been awake, which meant someone had been tracking their progress with enough precision to know they were 20 minutes out, which meant this farmhouse had communication and signal capabilities that were not visible from the road. Nora parked. The person inside, she said, "Tell me one true thing before I walk in." Briggs looked at the lit windows. "She is the smartest person who will be in any room she walks into," he said. "She knows it, and she manages that knowledge with more care than most people manage anything. She will not be what you expect." They got out. The cold here was different from the mountain cold. Drier, sharper. The kind that doesn't make allowances for what you've dressed for. The door opened before they reached the porch steps. Theodora Winslow was 41 years old, and she was wearing a cardigan, not ironically. Not as a performance. An actual cardigan, oatmeal-colored, with the sleeves pushed up to the elbows the way someone pushes sleeves when they've been working at a table for several hours and find fabric impractical. Brown hair going gray at the temples, pulled back with what appeared to be a mechanical pencil. Glasses with a small crack in the left lens repaired neatly with clear tape. The repair was precise. Of course it was. She looked, completely and sincerely, like a woman who taught rigorous mathematics at a university that valued rigor above all other things. She was also standing in a Wyoming doorway at 5:47 in the morning with the complete, operational alertness of someone who had been fully awake and working for hours. She looked at Nora. Not at her face first, at her hands, at the case, at the way her body was positioned relative to the doorframe. Then at her face. "You look like him," she said, around the eyes. "The way you're reading the room." She stepped back. "Come in before the wind finds the gap in the back wall. I've been meaning to patch it for a month, and I keep finding other things to do." Inside was warm and dense with work. Table covered in laptops and stacked papers and 3 mugs in various stages of having been consumed over the course of a long night. A second chair had been pulled up. She'd been expecting 2 of them. Nora sat, because her left knee, the one with the old training scar, was sending its polite but persistent reminder that it had opinions about 6 hours in a truck. Teddy poured coffee without asking, set mugs in front of both of them, sat across from Nora with her own cup and her cracked glasses, and looked at her with eyes that were doing exactly what Briggs' eyes had done on the ridge. Not the assessment of a person, the assessment of a capability. "How much did he tell you?" Teddy said. "Dates. A program that shouldn't exist, Iron Veal," Teddy said. "He didn't use the name, he wouldn't. He's careful in ways that sometimes cost him." She pulled a folder from the bottom of the nearest stack, set it on the table but didn't open it. "I'm going to tell you what Iron Veil is, and then I'm going to tell you something else. The second thing is harder than the first." "Tell me the second thing is coming," Nora said. "Then go in order." A pause. Teddy looked at her with an expression that might have been the beginning of respect. "All right," she said. "Raw Veal. Originated 2018. Nothing about it was official, because the entire point was that nothing about it could be official. Architecture built in the negative space of existing bureaucracy, using real budgets, real facilities, real personnel, arranged so no single document connected all the pieces. You had to see all of them simultaneously to understand what they made when assembled. And the people who built this structure had been extraordinarily careful to make sure that never happened. Stated internal purpose, decoded by Teddy over 2 years of working through fragments and anomalies and budget lines that didn't reconcile. Long-term containment of information hazardous personnel, not dangerous, not criminal, not enemy combatant, information hazardous, meaning people who knew things. Specific things, about specific operations conducted by specific individuals who had since moved into positions where those things could not be allowed to surface. Not for national security, for personal security, for protecting careers and financial arrangements. 7 confirmed cases, all military or former intelligence. All had at some point between 2009 and 2020 been in proximity to financial arrangements that were not sanctioned. That involved the routing of classified operational funding through private defense contractors. Not to enemy interests, to investment accounts, to shell companies. One incorporated in Delaware under a name that was an anagram of the deputy director's mother's maiden name, which meant he was either extraordinarily arrogant or extraordinarily stupid, and Teddy had concluded, after 2 years of rigorous study, that he was extraordinarily arrogant, which was its own category of dangerous because arrogant people don't build backup plans. Deputy Director Reginald Pruitt, 65 years old, CIA Operations, the man who appeared before congressional committees with the patient, weary expression of someone who has been explaining the genuine complexity of the world to elected officials for 20 years and expects to continue doing so for 20 more. He has been doing this since at least 2012, Teddy said. Iron Veil was built specifically to manage people who got close to the edges of it, people who filed the wrong reports, asked questions that had the wrong shape. My father filed a report, Nora said. March 2020, yes. Teddy pushed a single page across the table. This is an internal document from April 2020, 4 weeks after your father's report. Look at the highlighted section. Nora looked recommended reassignment AF Theater. Subjects access to be restricted effective transfer date. File review Deputy Director Operations reassignment Afghanistan, April 2020. And then 17 months later in the chaos and tragedy of August 2021, during the largest American military withdrawal in a generation. He disappeared. Pruitt arranged the reassignment. Nora said, yes, specifically to position him, yes, and use the withdrawal as cover. The withdrawal was real, Teddy said carefully. Chaos and tragedy were real and genuine and unconnected to this. A great deal happened in those 2 weeks that was true loss. But inside genuine chaos, if you control the right paperwork and you have the right access, you can move one man from one column to another. And nobody looks at one column when everything else is catastrophically on fire. Where is he? Nora said. Her voice was completely steady. The work it took to keep it that way was significant. 'Cause underneath the steadiness was something volcanic and old and 29 months deep that she was not going to let into this room. Teddy reached into the folder 1 page. Center of the table, Colin, Jr. Active detainee. Facility 9. November 2023. Not killed, not missing. Not the gray zone of unrecoverable active detainee. Reviewed 11 months ago. Someone had looked at this file 11 months ago and made a deliberate decision to continue. Marked it reviewed and walked away, like inventory being assessed and found satisfactory. Put both hands flat on the table, pressed her palms against the wood. Let the solidity of it be a fact. Her father was alive. 3 years. 29 months of standing at a memorial for a box that was empty and listening to people who had never loved him the way she loved him say correct and careful words about sacrifice and service. He was alive. He was in a place called Facility 9. Someone had reviewed his file 11 months ago and walked away. How far, she said, the only words available. Teddy looked at her for a moment before answering. Not hesitating, giving Nora the second she needed to land. Rural Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, Teddy said. Approximate region from the document. Not exact coordinates. That's the gap we need to close. What closes it? A secondary server cluster connected to Iron Veil's administrative infrastructure, located at a CIA-adjacent facility in Northern Virginia. If we can access that server remotely through approximate signal breach, we can extract the exact location data for Facility 9. If, Briggs said. If, Teddy said. It's not a simple if. The network is isolated. But it runs firmware that hasn't been updated since 2021, which is what happens when a classified facility can't call IT support without generating documentation that someone might eventually read. Nora looked at her. What do you need from me? And here it was. The second thing. The harder thing. Teddy set her coffee down and did not pick it up again. Before I answer that, she said, I need to tell you something about how you came to be in this room. Nora waited. I have been building this case for 2 years, Teddy said. 2 years of fragments and anomalies and documents I wasn't supposed to see and budget lines that didn't reconcile. I had enough to understand what Iron Veil was, to identify Pruitt as its center. What I didn't have was the means to act on the physical location, because acting on a CIA facility requires capabilities I don't possess. She paused, made herself say the next part cleanly. But you do. Not institutionally, personally. The skill set, the profile. No official military record, no intelligence affiliation, no flag in any active database. And a motivation that will not be compromised or bought. You knew about me, Nora said. I have been watching you for 9 months. The room was completely quiet. 9 months, Nora said. Yes, you watched me look for my father for 9 months. Yes, and you could have, she stopped. Started again with different words. At any point. Any of this? No, Teddy said. Not until I was certain of you. Not until I understood your capability and your stability, and whether you could carry this kind of information without fracturing in a direction I couldn't anticipate or manage. Nora looked at her steadily. Teddy did not look away. The route to Briggs, Nora said. You arranged it 4 months ago. I started placing documents where you would find them if you were as thorough as I had assessed you to be, each one pointing at an angle toward Aldous. I told him you were coming 12 days before you arrived. The rifle was his idea entirely. He said you would know it. I believed him. You engineered me, Nora said, flat. Factual. Not a question. I used your love for your father, Teddy said, and your capability, and your determination, all of which are genuinely yours, all of which are real. I pointed them in a direction at a time when pointing mattered. I am telling you this now, before we go any further, because you deserve to choose what comes next with complete information. Not because I managed you into a position where you have no choice. The wood stove at the back of the room made the sound wood stoves make when the fire settles. Nora looked at Briggs. He was looking at the table. You knew, she said. Not all of it, he said. I knew she had found you. I didn't know how long she had been watching. She looked back at Teddy, at the cracked glasses and the mechanical pencil, and the woman who had spent 2 years building something meticulous and completely alone, and had looked at Nora's grief and her capability and decided she was a tool that could be pointed. The anger was there, legitimate and real and completely earned, and underneath it, with equal weight, Teddy was telling her now. She could have not told her. She could have kept pointing and managing all the way to the end, and Nora would never have known the difference. She had chosen not to do that. Are you done? Nora said. Teddy blinked. Yes. Then show me the Virginia facility, rural Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, Teddy said. Approximate region from the document. Not exact coordinates. It's the gap we need to close. What closes it? A secondary server cluster connected to Iron Veal's administrative infrastructure, located at a CIA-adjacent facility in Northern Virginia. If we access that server through approximate signal breach, we can extract the exact location data for Facility 9. If, Briggs said. If, Teddy said. It's not a simple if. The network is isolated, but it runs outdated firmware, which is what happens when a classified facility can't call IT support without generating documentation. Nora looked at her. What do you need from me? And here it was. The second thing. The harder thing. Teddy set her coffee down and did not pick it up again. Before I answer that, she said, I need to tell you something about how you came to be in this room. Nora waited. I have been building this case for 2 years, Teddy said. 2 years of fragments and anomalies and budget lines that didn't reconcile. I had enough to understand Iron Vial, with Pruitt as its center. What I didn't have was the means to act on the physical location, because that requires capabilities I don't possess, she paused. But you do, not institutionally, personally, the skill set, the profile. No official military record, no intelligence affiliation, no flag in any active database, and a motivation that will not be compromised or bought. You knew about me, Nora said. I have been watching you for 9 months. The room was completely quiet. 9 months, Nora said. Yes, you watched me look for my father for 9 months. Yes, and you could have. She stopped, started again with different words, point. Any of this? No, Teddy said. Not until I was certain of you. Not until I understood your capability and your stability, and whether you could carry this kind of information without fracturing in a direction I couldn't anticipate. Nora looked at her steadily. Teddy did not look away. The route to Briggs, Nora said. You arranged it 4 months ago. I started placing documents where you would find them if you were as thorough as I had assessed you to be, each one pointing at an angle toward Aldous. I told him you were coming 12 days before you arrived. The rifle was his idea. He said you would know it. You engineered me, Nora said. Flat, factual. I used your love for your father, Teddy said, and your capability. I am telling you this now because you deserve to choose what comes next with complete information. The wood stove at the back of the room made the sound wood stoves make when the fire settles. Nora looked at Briggs. He was looking at the table. You knew, she said. Not all of it, he said. I knew she had found you. I didn't know how long she had been watching. She looked back at Teddy, at the cracked glasses and the mechanical pencil and the woman who had spent 2 years building something meticulous and completely alone, and had looked at Nora's grief and decided she was a tool that could be pointed. The anger was there, legitimate and real and completely earned, and underneath it, with equal weight, Teddy was telling her now. She could have not told her. She could have kept pointing and managing all the way to the end, and Nora would never have known the difference. She had chosen not to do that. Are you done? Nora said. Teddy blinked. Yes. Then show me the Virginia facility. Spent 3 days at the farmhouse. Not comfortable days. Not the kind where trust builds warmly over shared meals and long conversations. 3 days of work. Hard, specific, focused work that required all of them to be entirely themselves and nothing extra. Teddy had architectural schematics of the Virginia facility. Not official ones, those didn't exist anywhere accessible. Reconstructed from utility permits, satellite imagery at multiple altitudes, and a decommissioned HVAC service contract filed with the county assessor's office in 2019 that contained, buried in its appendices, a floor plan matching nothing publicly known about the building. The kind of document that survives because bureaucracy is vast and nobody reads the appendices of HVAC contracts. The server cluster, 2nd floor, northeast corner, behind a cipher-locked door. Teddy estimated 68% probability of remote breach given access to the building's external network, which was password protected, but running firmware that had been outdated for 3 years. What happens when a classified facility can't generate documentation about updating its own security systems? Nora's position, exterior, western approach. Commercial building 1,090 meters from the facility's main gate with rooftop access via an exterior service ladder. Clear sight lines to the gate, the east parking, the ground-level exterior on 3 sides. Not going to Virginia to shoot anyone. Going to be the fact nobody inside had included in their calculations. The option in the room that the room didn't know about, which she had been in one form or another her entire adult life. Briggs brought one additional contact. Harlan Voss, former Army Ranger, 54 years old. Quiet in the specific way of people who have been in extremely loud situations long enough that quiet has become their natural state. 11 years of intermittent work alongside Briggs. His role, proximity breach, disabling the north side exterior cameras with a jammer the size of a thick wallet on the second night, when Harlan was asleep and Teddy was running signal tests in the van outside. Briggs sat at the table alone with a mug of cold coffee. Nora found him there and sat down across from him. He looked at her the way people look when they've been somewhere in their own head and have come back to find someone in the room. 11 years, he said, unprompted. Between the day Harlan and I first worked together and right now, she waited. I recommended him, he said. For this, I vouched for him. You didn't know, she said. No, he said, I didn't know, but I also didn't think to question it, which might be the same thing in some accounting systems. She thought about that. About the accounting systems that operate in a person after they have trusted someone for 11 years and been wrong about them in a specific and consequential way. He let the transfer complete, she said. Yes, that's not nothing. No, Briggs said, it's not. I'm trying to understand what it is. She was quiet for a moment. My father used to say, she said, that most people aren't entirely one thing, that the man who does the wrong thing and the man who can't quite bring himself to do all of the wrong thing are sometimes the same person. He looked at her. He said that to you. When I was about 14 and furious at a friend, was trying to help me understand the situation was more complicated than it looked. Was it more complicated? Yes, she said. I was still angry. But it was more complicated. He looked at the cold coffee. I don't know if I'm angry at Harlan, he said. Keep finding something more like grief, which is not what I expected. It might be both, she said. It might be both, he agreed. Sat in the farmhouse kitchen with the Wyoming wind working around the building and 11 remaining days on the inside of Nora's left wrist. He gave us the data, she said finally. Whatever he is and whatever he did and whatever he'll have to answer for, he gave us the yes, Briggs said. He did, then we use it. Yes, Briggs said. We do. He picked up the cold coffee, looked at it, put it back down. Your father would like you, said, the person you've become. He would recognize you and he would like what he recognized. She looked at the rifle case on the far side of the room. He's going to get the chance to have an opinion about it, she said. In person, Briggs looked at her. For the first time since the ridge, something in his face changed. Something opened. Not much. The briefest shift. But it was there. Yes, he said. He is on the evening before the Virginia operation. Briggs told her about Pruitt and her father. 11 years, he said. 2009 to 2020. Your father said to me, more than once, directly, that Pruitt was the most capable operational officer he'd ever been partnered with. I know they worked together, she said. What isn't in the documents is that in 2019, father found the first discrepancy. A contractor payment for a 2017 Kabul operation that didn't reconcile with the mission scope. Not by a small amount, by a significant amount in a very specific direction. He brought it to me first. What did you tell him? I told him to verify it 3 times before doing anything, because accusing a deputy director without ironclad documentation doesn't end the deputy director. It ends you. He verified it, she said, 3 times. Over 9 months. And then he did what James Callahan always did when he was certain of something. The right thing, which meant reporting it through proper internal channels in March of 2020, and Pruitt knew within 48 hours, she said. The internal reporting channel ran through a division Pruitt had years of access to. Your father didn't know that. The channel was supposed to be protected. She looked at the table, her father at a desk somewhere, filling out a report, following the correct procedure, believing the system existed for the reason it claimed to exist for. Pruitt didn't hate him, Briggs said. He looked at your father and saw a specific problem, a solvable one. He'd managed problems like this twice before, not through violence, through administration, the bureaucratic version of making a person disappear, which is tidier than the alternative and leaves nothing that looks like what it actually is. He was protecting himself, she said. It's a smaller reason than fear and worse than it, Briggs said. The fire burned. Outside, Wyoming was dark and enormous and completely indifferent. The man my father trusted for 11 years, she said. Put him in a sub-level cell and reviewed his file once a year. Yes, and now has scheduled his termination. She used the word deliberately, because precision was honesty, because the 2022 leak spooked him, Briggs said. The partial document you found. He realized the file existed in more places than he'd controlled. She looked at the schematics of Facility 9 spread across the table. This chain started with my father filing a report. She said, yes, and it ends here. She said it as the logical conclusion of a sequence, because that was what it was. Briggs looked at her for a long time. It doesn't have to end any particular way, he said. That's the part that belongs to you. She sat with that for a long time. Long enough for the fire to shift and settle and the wind outside to find the gap in the back wall and let her know it was still there. Then she picked up the schematics from the table. Walk me through the sub-level layout again, she said. 3rd level specifically. I want to run the corridor from a different approach. He pulled his chair around beside her without comment. Because that was who Aldous Briggs was, a man who understood when a discussion was over and when work needed to resume, and who moved between those 2 states without marking the transition with anything unnecessary. They worked until 2 in the morning. Teddy came in from the van at 11 with fresh analysis of the Virginia facility's guard rotation, which she had refined by cross-referencing the exterior camera timestamps she'd captured during 11 days of remote observation against the facility's documented personnel count, which she had obtained from a procurement filing for protective services that the contracting officer had unfortunately filed with the standard GSA system rather than the classified annex, where it belonged. Because bureaucracy was vast and procurement officers were overworked, and sometimes the wrong form got filed in the wrong place, the rotation gap was consistent, 8 to 12 minutes, 44 to 56 minutes past each hour. Consistent meant predictable. Predictable meant usable. The gap holds across all 11 days, Teddy said, including 2 days of significant weather events, which suggests it's structural rather than situational. Someone established this rotation pattern and nobody has questioned it. They haven't needed to, Briggs said. Nobody has tested the gap until now, Nora said. Until now. She wrote the phrase on the edge of the structural survey, next to the approach route she had drawn. Until now. Because that was all any plan was at its foundation, the record of everything that had not yet been tried. The gap in the wall that nobody had walked through yet. She was going to walk through it. On the 3rd day, the day before they drove to Virginia, Nora went outside before dawn and stood in the Wyoming field behind the farmhouse and practiced her breathing. Not for the shot, she didn't need to practice the shot. For the waiting, for the particular quality of stillness required when you are lying in a position for an extended period, and the cold is working on your joints, and your left knee is expressing its opinion, and the earpiece is silent, and you are not doing anything at all except being ready to do something. She breathed in the Wyoming dark and thought about her father in the third sublevel of a facility in Pennsylvania, choosing every morning to stand straight. And she thought about what standing straight costs when you have been doing it for 38 months. Physical cost, the energy cost, the cost of making the same decision so many times that it is no longer a decision but a practice, a discipline, a way of being that you maintain because the alternative is what you would become if you stopped maintaining it. She breathed and was still and thought about him. And then she went inside and checked her equipment for the fourth time that day. Because that was the last 5% of the work. And she was going to do it. That night after Briggs had gone to sleep, and Harlan had been asleep for hours, and the farmhouse had gone quiet except for the fire and the Wyoming wind, Teddy was still at the table, still working. The sound of her typing constant and methodical. Sound of someone building something rather than just producing output. Nora sat across from her with the TAC 338 across her knees and watched her work for a few minutes. The data we pull from the Virginia server, Nora said. The iron vial file. Pruitt's name on the detention order. The Facility 9 coordinates. How many copies? Teddy looked up over the cracked glasses. How many would you like? Enough that it cannot be walked back, Nora said. Enough that if something goes wrong in Virginia, there's no versionist where the file disappears, and the whole thing goes back to zero. Teddy turned back to the laptop. Her hands moved. For 90 seconds in the quiet kitchen, she built something. 3 journalists with documented track records on intelligence accountability reporting, 2 Senate offices on the Armed Services Committee, 1 federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia whose record she had apparently been monitoring for some time. Encrypted packages. Time-delayed delivery. Set to transmit in 72 hours unless manually canceled by Teddy with a specific authentication key. Done, she said. If Virginia works, Nora said, we cancel the delay and deliver everything directly. Names, accounts, contracts, the facility location. All of it together. And if Virginia doesn't work, then the packages deliver themselves, Nora said. And they don't need us to exist for that to happen. Teddy looked at her for a moment that was longer than most of Teddy's moments. Your father trained you well, she said. Nora looked at the inscription on the stock. He had a head start, she said. She sat in the kitchen while the fire burned lower, and the night pressed against the farmhouse windows. She thought about her father standing at the kitchen window in the early mornings when she was small. Just standing there. She used to think he was thinking about nothing in particular. Later, she understood he was checking. He was always checking, because some part of the training never fully comes off. You learn to do it quietly enough that the people around you don't notice, but you never stop. She thought about the envelope in the locked cabinet in Briggs' cabin. She had not asked to open it. She had said not yet, and she had meant it, and she still meant it. Not because she was afraid of what it contained, because she understood what it was. Her father had left that envelope for a version of this outcome, for the version where someone came looking, and it was hers to open when she had him back, when they were sitting somewhere together and the thing it contained could be received properly, in context, with him beside her to answer whatever questions it raised. She was going to have him beside her, in 11 hours more or less, give or take what the facility and the night and the rotation gap produced in terms of actual elapsed time between this kitchen and that field and whatever came after, 11 hours. She had been counting days for 29 months, and now she was counting hours, and soon it would be minutes, and then it would simply be happening, and the counting would be unnecessary. She thought about her father deciding every morning to stand straight. She thought about that with the full weight of it, not as a concept, as a physical practice, as what the body actually does when it commits to that kind of decision over that kind of duration. The back, the shoulders, the cost in small muscle groups of maintaining posture, when there is nothing requiring it except the decision itself, and he had made that decision every single morning. Because standing straight was the thing that was entirely his, that the room and the schedule and the people who had put him there could not reach. They controlled everything else. They couldn't control whether he stood straight. She understood that now in a way she hadn't before tonight. She held the rifle across her knees. She looked at the 4 words, the rifle remembers. So did she. Everything in its exact shape. And she was going to remember what happened in the next few days in its exact shape too. whatever that turned out to be. Northern Virginia. Night. Temperature 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Light rain that had started at 9 and seemed committed to continuing indefinitely. Nora climbed the service ladder to the roof of the commercial building at 9:14 p.m. She had run the route in the dark 3 nights earlier, alone, timing every section, 17 seconds from ground to position. She had timed it because the things you haven't rehearsed are the things that cost you in the moments when everything else is also costing you something. She got into position. Rifle down on the bipod. Scope dialed, 1,090 meters to the facility's main gate. Set, she said into the earpiece. Copy, Briggs said. 2 blocks north in the parked truck. Copy, Teddy said. In the van south on the cross street, laptop on her knees. She lay in the rain on the roof of a building 1,090 meters from a facility that did and breathed. Slow, deliberate. She had done this before. Not this specific roof, not this specific night. But this, the position, the weight, the earpiece, the cold, the rain on the scope housing, the space between preparation and action, where there was nothing to do except be completely present and not spend any of that presence on anything that wasn't the moment directly in front of her. She was good at this moment. She had been training for this specific moment for 3 years without knowing that's what she was doing. She had thought she was looking for her father. She had thought she was building a set in the margins of that search, because having a skill set meant having something to do with the days that wasn't only grief and momentum, and the particular loneliness of knowing something that the official record refused to confirm. But she understood now that she had been building toward this. This roof, this rain, this night, this position 1,090 meters from the place where the work of 29 months would either prove sufficient or would prove that she had missed something she should not have missed. She had not missed anything. She breathed. Harlan is moving, Briggs said. She watched through the scope, the gate, the east parking. The ground-level exterior, where no guard was standing because it was 41 degrees and raining, and the security rotation had a documented gap between 44 and 56 minutes past each hour. Gap Teddy had established by 11 days of patient remote observation. Everything still, then Teddy. I'm in the network. Transfer initiating. 38 seconds, 38 seconds. Nora counted heartbeats. Something to do with the waiting, the particular pressure of a moment that has been weeks in preparation, and is now happening at its own pace regardless. 22 seconds. The rain was picking up. She wiped the scope glass with the cloth from her left pocket. Checked the gate. Checked the east parking structure. Checked the approach road. A vehicle. Not on any scheduled pattern. Coming from the north entrance road, moving with the directed urgency of a car that has been told specifically to move urgently. Briggs, I see it. Not scheduled. No, Teddy. How long? 9 seconds. The car reached the gate. Stopped hard. The passenger door was already opening before the vehicle fully stopped, the kind of exit that means someone got a call and has been in motion since the moment they hung up. Transfer complete, Teddy said. I have. The alarm activated. She didn't hear it, but she saw it. The quality of light inside the facility changed through the ground floor windows, and 3 figures appeared simultaneously at the main entrance. That particular simultaneous appearance only happens when an internal alarm has pulled them there. Teddy, alarm, I know. It didn't come from my breach. My access was clean. This came from inside the facility. Inside, someone inside had triggered it, which meant someone inside knew they were there, static. Then a voice in the earpiece that was not Briggs and was not Teddy, Harlan Voss, but the voice was wrong. The tone wrong. The cadence wrong in a way that took half a second to register and then registered completely all at once. I'm sorry, Aldous. Harlan said, I genuinely am. The channel went dead 1 second. Just the sound of rain on the scope housing and her own breathing. 2 compasses. Wade. Her voice. Flat as she could make it. Where is Harlan? Briggs' voice came back with the salsa main and taken something in and is continuing forward because forward is the only direction available. Go on, he said. Exit now. Secondary point, she was already moving rifle case. Down the ladder. She had timed this 17 seconds. She hit the ground in the rain and moved without running because running on a street in Northern Virginia at 9:30 p.m. is visible, and visible is the opposite of what she needed to be right now. She moved, quickly and unremarkably and completely. Secondary extraction point was a parking structure 4 blocks east, level 3. A gray Honda CR-V with Wyoming plates and a cracked left taillight that Nora had noted 3 days earlier when she'd confirmed the vehicle. Teddy was already there. Laptop closed on her knees. Face the particular color of someone who has processed something they haven't finished processing. Nora got on the back seat. Briggs pulled out immediately, smooth and deliberate, the exit looking like exactly nothing in particular. Car leaving a parking structure. Nobody spoke for 3 blocks. 4 then. I have the data, Teddy said. The car was quiet. The transfer completed 1 second before the alarm activated, she said. 1 second. I have the complete Facility 9 location data. Nora processed that 1 second. Harlan had triggered the alarm. Had not interfered with the data transfer. He'd had full capability to interrupt the connection at any point across those 38 seconds. He'd known what Teddy was doing. He'd known what stopping it would mean. He'd warned whoever he'd been reporting to that they were there. But he had let them finish. Nobody spoke again for 4 more miles. Then Teddy said, "For what it's worth, I want to say something about Harlan." Briggs looked at the windshield. He knew when he triggered that alarm that he was ending something, Teddy said. Whatever arrangement he had made, triggering that alarm ended it. There was no walking it back, and he still let the transfer complete. She paused. I'm not saying that makes what he did acceptable. I'm saying he was doing 2 things at once. One of them was the wrong thing, and one of them was something else. Briggs drove his voice, he said finally. The way he said, "I'm sorry." It wasn't the sorry of someone caught. It was something different. What was it? Nora said. I'm still working on that, he said. She thought about what it takes to make that specific decision, to warn the people paying you, while letting the people you betrayed take what they came for. The mathematics of standing in that space. She thought about all the small decisions people made where nobody was watching. Not the large dramatic ones. The small ones that cost something ordinary and produced nothing visible, and nevertheless determined, over time, exactly who you were. He's still out there, she said. As Briggs said, somewhere, yes. She looked at the Facility 9 coordinates on the screen. 1 thing at a time, she said. 1 thing at a time, he agreed. Drove east through the Pennsylvania night toward a place that didn't officially exist, to find a man the official record said was gone. The coordinates, she said. Pennsylvania, rural Lancaster County, Teddy said. I have the exact location. She opened the laptop. The screen cast pale light across the car interior. She turned it to face Nora. At the bottom of the Facility 9 location file in a scheduling field, a notation updated 6 days earlier, KNJR, schedule closure, 19 days. Closure, that word took up physical space in the car, like something had entered through a crack in the door and was now displacing the air. Not reviewed, not continued, not transferred. Closure 19 days from 6 days ago, 13 days from right now. Nora reached into her jacket pocket, found the pen, wrote the number on the inside of her left wrist, not because she would forget, because she needed the number to have a physical presence, to be something with edges she could feel. 13. Then she closed the laptop. Drive faster, she said. They checked into a motel outside Lancaster that asked nothing because it had no investment in the answers. Cash, 2 rooms, no names. A vending machine in the hall that took 3 attempts to register each selection. Nora did not sleep. She sat on the bed with the reconstructed schematics of Facility 9 spread across the comforter. The structural survey Teddy had pulled from the Lancaster County Assessor's Office, filed under Keystone Agricultural Holdings LLC, incorporated in Delaware, parent company traceable through 2 layers to a financial instrument managed by a firm whose only named partner was one Gregory Pruitt, younger brother of Reginald Pruitt, who listed himself as a retired agricultural consultant in Scottsdale and had not filed documentation related to a single agricultural project in 11 years. He had hidden it in his family. Because families feel safe. Because you don't investigate your own brother's shell company, except when someone does. The property had been purchased in March 2017. The county zoning review triggered by the sale required a structural survey, filed with the county assessor's office, matter of public record for anyone who knew what company name to search under. Teddy knew. Teddy searched everything and didn't stop until the edges connected. Nora ran the schematics, 4 above-ground floors presenting as active agricultural operation. Equipment maintenance. The normal visible infrastructure of a Lancaster County farm, normal from the county road, normal from any altitude below. Different 3 sublevels. Deepest, the 3rd sublevel, reinforced structurally far beyond what any legitimate basement required. Load-bearing capacity consistent with permanent construction. Not a holding point, not a transit facility built to keep people. indefinitely. 4 separately climate-controlled zones below grade, evidenced by 4 external exhaust vents on the north face of the main barn structure, equally spaced. 4 zones, 4 cells, 8 guards, 2 on exterior perimeter, 2 on interior ground level, 2 rotating through the sublevels, 2 on rest at any given time, rotation on a modified 6-hour cycle, transition point every 6 hours, the next transition 14 hours from now. She ran the approach 6 times in her head, changed 1 variable each iteration. Guard positions, lighting conditions, weather. An element she hadn't anticipated. Each time she found the fragile point in the plan, and each time she decided precisely what she would do at that point. On the 6th iteration, she closed her eyes and walked the corridor in the dark, and found the 3rd sublevel, and found the 3rd door on the left, and brought her father out. She did this until it was not a plan but a reflex, until the corridor existed in her body the same way the ridge had. At 4:30 in the morning, she went to Briggs' door. He opened it immediately. "Still dressed, I have the approach," she said. "Come look at it." Sat at the small table in his room for 2 hours and went through every element. He asked the questions she hadn't asked herself. She answered them. He pushed on the places that were soft, and she pushed back, and they found the solutions, and when there was no solution, they built contingencies, and when the contingencies were built, they built contingencies for those. 6:30 in the morning, Briggs made terrible instant coffee on the room's coffee maker, and they drank it and looked at the plan. 13 days from the notation, Nora said, 12 now. Briggs said, 12. She looked at the plan, the approach route she had drawn on the back of the structural survey, at the treeline position and the distance to the gate in the sublevel corridor that now existed in her body as a reflex. "We go in on day 11. We don't use the last day," he nodded once. The nod of a man who has planned enough operations to know that the margin you think you have is always smaller than it actually is. 11 is, he said. Then we move. She looked at the number on her wrist. Still readable. 13 fading slowly toward 12. She thought about her father in the 3rd sublevel. Thought about him deciding every morning to stand straight in a room he had not chosen and could not leave. The particular discipline of maintaining your own architecture when the space around you is designed to make that impossible. She thought about what 11 days felt like from the inside of that room. She was choosing not to think about it too directly, because thinking about it too directly was the kind of thing that could compromise steadiness at the wrong moment. She noted the thought, acknowledged it as legitimate, and placed it in the part of herself she was keeping separate from the operational part. Filed it, for later, for after. She had not let herself think in terms of after for 29 months. After had been too conditional, too dependent on variables outside her control. After required assuming a specific outcome, and she had learned, the hard way, at the memorial for the empty box, listening to words that were correct in every way, except that they were about a man who was not dead, that she was not going to assume outcomes, but now, she was thinking in terms of 11 days, and after 11 days was after. She looked at the approach route she had drawn on the back of the structural survey, at the treeline position, at the gap in the rotation pattern, at the single stairwell, at the 3rd sublevel, 3rd door on the left. If the structural logic held, the zone mapping was right. She had verified the structural logic 4 times from 4 different sources. The zone mapping was derived from the ventilation specifications and the HVAC service records, and 2 separate satellite passes that showed the exhaust configuration. 4 separately climate-controlled zones meant 4 separately enclosed spaces, meant 4 cells. 3rd door on the left, her father had taught her, trust the work, not the hope, not the wish, not the need, the work. The preparation is the trust you give yourself, and you have either done it or you haven't. And if you've done it, trust it. And if you haven't, go do it. She had done it. She trusted it. The rifle was in its case on the bed. The rifle remembers 11 days. Then they would find out what she remembered too. Day 11, she wrote the number on her wrist over the faded previous numbers. The ink had accumulated into something that looked like a bruise from a distance and like a countdown from close up, which was accurate on both counts. 4:47 a.m. Temperature 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind from the northeast at 4 miles per hour. Clear sky, no precipitation. The sky was the particular black that exists in the deepest part of the night, the hour before anything begins to change, the part that feels permanent until it isn't. Nora lay in the western tree line, 760 meters from the main gate of a farm that was not a farm, the TAC 338 steady on its bipod. Scope confirmed and dialed. She had verified 0 30 minutes ago, 2 miles east, no adjustment needed. The rifle shot exactly where she asked it to. It had always shot where she asked. She breathed, slow and even and deliberate, in her ear. Briggs. 40 meters behind her in the tree line, thermal binoculars and radio, watching the facility. In her ear, Teddy, in a vehicle on the county road half a mile south, running a low-frequency signal scan, looking for anything that indicated detection. She lay in the western tree line and waited and thought about a morning in West Texas when she was 9 years old. It was the first time her father had let her hold the rifle. Not a child's .2 set up to be gentle. His rifle, full weight of it across her small arms. The barrel impossibly long, the scope impossibly large. Her whole body shaking, not from cold, it was warm for February in Texas, but from understanding that this was serious. This object had a purpose, and the purpose was consequential, and she was holding it. He had knelt behind her, not touching her, just close enough that she could feel the presence of him. The gun doesn't know you're nervous, so don't tell it. She had tried to stop shaking, which made it worse for about 30 seconds before she understood. He didn't mean stop feeling nervous. He meant don't communicate it to the mechanism. Keep your hands still, regardless of what your body was doing underneath. Stillness on the outside was the job. What happened inside was her own business. She had stilled her hands. The gun didn't know she was nervous. She had been holding that stillness, in one form or another, in one kind of cold or another, on one ridge or another, ever since. She breathed in the Pennsylvania dark and thought about her father deciding every morning to stand straight in a room he had not chosen and could not leave. The particular discipline of maintaining your own architecture when everything around you is designed to make that impossible. And beneath the earpiece and the cold and the rifle and the 11 days of preparation that were now just reflexes available to be called on, her father, third sublevel, if the structural logic held, if the occupancy matched the zone mapping. Every assumption she had verified 3 times was correct. She had done the work. The last 5% and everything before it. Her father was in that building. 13 days were 11 now were 0 because she was here. And here was the only number that mattered. Guard rotation, Briggs said quietly in her ear. Our exterior moving south, east exterior stationary at the equipment barn. Window opening now, she exhaled. The last controlled breath before the thing begins to move on its own momentum. Copy, she said, holding position. Briggs and Teddy moved on their respective vectors. She lay in the tree line and tracked the east exterior guard through the scope, not her target. Her role here was geometry. She was the fact nobody inside had included in their calculations. The option in the room that the room didn't know existed. 4 minutes, 5, 6. She breathed, she waited. She was very good at waiting. Father had taught her that too. We're inside, Briggs said, his voice lower now. Different quality, she exhaled. All the way down, copy, she said. I'm holding. She lay in the Pennsylvania dark at 22 degrees and held. Third sublevel, the stairwell was concrete, unheated. It held the smell of mineral water and long-closed air and the specific quality of underground that has been underground without change for years. The smell of permanence, space that has stopped expecting anything to be different. Briggs counted doors in the corridor. 1, 2, third on the left, standard keyed lock. Older than the electronic locks on the other doors, added later, an additional layer for something that required additional layer. He had it open in 38 seconds. He had timed this kind of lock in the farmhouse for 3 days running. He pushed the door. And James Callahan was standing in the center of the room, sitting, not lying on the cot, not in the corner, standing in the center of the 10 by 12 space with its single overhead fluorescent light and its institutional concrete floor and its cot and its complete absence of anything warm or chosen or human, standing with the particular uprightness of a man who has made the same decision every morning for 38 months, the decision to remain standing, to keep that specific posture, to hold that one thing completely and irrevocably his when everything else had been taken. His hair was entirely white. He had lost weight that showed in the angles of his face, in the sharpness of his jaw, in the way his clothes sat or frame that had been larger. His hands were at his sides. They were steady. Briggs looked at his hands first. Because hands were honest, faces could be managed. Hands were honest. Steady, 59 years old. 38 months in this room. And steady. He looked at Briggs. For a long moment, long enough that Briggs counted his own heartbeats to stay level, he just looked, and what was in his eyes was not surprise. Not relief in the ordinary sense. It was something older and deeper than both. The expression of a man who had not allowed himself to fully believe this moment would come, because believing in things that might not come was a particular kind of damage he had refused to sustain. And now it had come. "You're late," James Callahan said. "Traffic," Briggs said, 2 words. Because they were men who had stood in enough situations where language could not carry the full weight of what existed between them, that they had long since stopped expecting it to. The weight carried itself. It had always carried itself. "Nora is outside," Briggs said. James went very still. 760 meters. West tree line. "She's been covering us since we moved." A pause that was full of something Briggs did not try to name. Not his to name. "How long has she been looking?" James said. "Quiet. 29 months, Briggs said. His jaw moved. Once. A motion so small it was barely a motion at all. "How's her form?" he said. Even quieter. Briggs looked at him. 38 months of this fluorescent room on a man's face. "Cleaner than yours ever was," he said. And James Callahan, who had not smiled in a length of time he could not precisely determine, had not allowed himself the energy of it because every piece of energy had been going towards standing and staying present, came very close to one. "Good," he said. His voice didn't fully hold on that one word. "Just that one. That's good." They moved through the corridor and up the concrete stairwell and through the ground-level passage and to the side exit on the west face of the facility. Briggs pushed it open, and James Callahan stepped out into the Pennsylvania night, 22 degrees, clean and cold and completely real. He stopped, not a tactical stop, not caution. He stopped because the air was different from the air in the sublevel. The air in the sublevel was temperature-controlled and filtered and had been recycled for 38 months. This air was cold and alive and smelled like actual earth and actual sky and actual night. He stopped and breathed it, just that, just breathed. Briggs stood beside him and said nothing at all, because a man breathing free air for the first time in 38 months deserves whatever seconds that takes. He doesn't need anything said about it. He doesn't need anything at all except those seconds. Then James looked toward the western tree line. 260 meters of open Pennsylvania field in the dark, and a figure was already moving through it, not running, walking, long strides, even and deliberate and completely without hesitation. The TAC 338 case in her left hand, the way her father had taught her to carry it, balanced at the center, not at the end. The way her whole body moved through the dark field was the way he had taught her to move through terrain. It was and wasn't him. It was completely her. And it was also, unmistakably, something she had learned from him. James Callahan watched his daughter cross the field in the dark, and the thing he had not allowed himself to fully believe was happening. It was real. He had spent 38 months in that room constructing a very careful relationship with hope. Because hope, in that room, was the most dangerous thing available. Hope meant attaching your stability to something outside the room, something beyond the 10 by 12 space, and the fluorescent light, and the decision every morning about how to stand. And attaching your stability to something outside meant being at the mercy of whether that thing arrived or didn't. So he had not hoped. Not exactly. He had instead maintained a kind of careful open space where hope was permitted to exist as a possibility without being allowed to become a requirement. He had kept the space available. He had not let them close it. Every morning when he made the decision to stand straight, he was also making the decision to keep that space available, to not let it fill with the alternative. And now the space was filled with his daughter, walking across a Pennsylvania field in the dark at 4 in the morning with his rifle in her hand, and 38 months of looking for him in the way she moved. He watched her come and felt something loosen in his chest that had been held tight for a very long time. Not break, not collapse. Loosen. The way a muscle loosens when the work is done and it is finally permitted to rest. She reached the gate. She stood on the other side of the fence and looked at him, and he looked at her. Neither of them moved for a moment that was not awkward and not performed. That was simply the time it takes for two people who have been separated for 38 months to let the reality of each other register completely. He had imagined this. He had tried not to imagine it, tried to keep hope in its careful available space, and still sometimes in the sublevel he had imagined it, the face he would see. The way she would stand, he had not quite gotten it right. She was more herself than he had imagined, which was the thing about people you love. You carry them inside you, and the version you carry is always slightly less than the actual person, slightly smaller than the real thing, and then you see them, and the real thing exceeds what you were carrying in every particular direction simultaneously. She was more herself. She was entirely herself. She was standing at the gate of a facility that didn't officially exist with his rifle in her hand at 4 in the morning, because she had spent 29 months looking for him and had found a retired Master Chief in Montana and a woman in a cardigan in Wyoming and had put together a plan and had executed it and was here. He was going to have opinions about some of her tactical choices. The open field approach in the last 200 meters was debatable. He was going to tell her that. Later. Much later. Possibly years from now. Right now he was just going to look at her. She was 140 meters from the facility fence when the headlights came around the north face of the equipment barn, black SUV. Moving at the pace of a vehicle that has been directed. Federal plates. She read them through the scope while continuing to walk, because stopping was visible and visible was wrong. The passenger door opening before the vehicle fully stopped. She stopped. Not because of the vehicle. Because of who got out of it. She recognized him at 400 meters in the dark through a scope. Because Teddy had put his photograph on the wall of the Wyoming farmhouse for 3 days. Because some faces you learn the way you learn terrain, for what it will cost you if you get the details wrong. Reginald Pruitt, 65 years old. Standing at the gate of a facility that didn't officially exist in any document he signed his name to, looking out at the dark field, toward the tree line, toward where she had been, his eyes moving across the open ground with the unsettled quality of a man who can feel the geometry of something he hasn't identified. She stopped and brought the rifle up, crosshairs on him, 400 meters wind, 4 miles per hour, northeast. Nothing at this range. She had the shot completely fully. Without any of the uncertainty that makes shots hard. She had the geometry and the conditions and the capability and the justification and 29 months of counting days and the word closure on a screen 6 days ago, and all of it. I see him, Briggs said in her ear. Very quiet. She said nothing, Nora, just her name. Then, your call, 2 words that contained the whole of the decision. She stood in the open field at 4 in the morning in 22 degrees of Pennsylvania dark. The crosshairs were completely steady on a man who had put her father in a 10 by 12 room for 38 months and reviewed the file once a year. She had the shot. And she thought about the 4 words on the stock of the rifle in her hands. Not consciously. They just arrived. The rifle remembers. She had understood those words, when she first saw them on the ridge, as being about the weapon. About accuracy that persists. About how a well-made rifle carries in itself the evidence of every decision made behind it. Standing here now, she understood what her father had actually been recording when he carved them. Not the rifle. You remember every decision you make in the field. Every time you had the shot and took it. Every time you had it and didn't. Every choice lives in you, in the exact shape of the choice, in what you knew when you made it, in what it cost and what it saved, whether the record reflects it or not. Whether anyone else ever knows it or not, whether it is ever witnessed or acknowledged or understood by any person other than you, the records could say whatever Pruitt needed them to say. But she would carry this, the exact shape of this, for the rest of her life. She thought about Teddy in a farmhouse kitchen 90 seconds into building something quiet and permanent. About 3 journalists, about 2 Senate offices, about 1 federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia who had been receiving right now package that was already in motion whether anyone canceled it or not. About Teddy telling her, I used your love for your father and your capability. I'm telling you this now because you deserve to choose what comes next with complete information. She thought about the choice Teddy had made in that kitchen. The choice to tell her the truth when not telling it would have worked just as well. The choice to make the moment real rather than managed. To let Nora make a genuine decision rather than an engineered one. That choice had cost Teddy something. It had risked something, Nora's cooperation, the whole operational plan, everything Teddy had spent 2 years building. And Teddy had made it anyway, because some things were worth more when they were chosen freely, which was precisely what was happening right now in this field at 4 in the morning, with the crosshairs on the man who had made 38 months of her father's life a 10 by 12 room. She was choosing freely. That was the point, not from fear, not from doubt, not from uncertainty about whether she could make this shot. She could make this shot. She could make this shot so cleanly that the record would show nothing, and no one would ever know, and it would look, from every available angle, like exactly the kind of thing that happens to men who have arranged the disappearance of intelligence assets, and kept them in illegal detention facilities, and scheduled their closure. She could make this shot. And she was choosing not to, because Pruitt was already finished. That was already true. Whether she pulled this trigger or not. Which meant this moment was not about stopping him. She knew what this moment was about. She had known it the second she saw him get out of the car. She examined it. Right there in the field in the dark. Honestly. The way her father had taught her to examine the things you find inside yourself that you would rather not look at directly. She looked at it. And she put it down. She lowered the rifle. "He's worth more talking than dead," she said into the ear. Her voice was steady. "Walk him out. He testifies. Every name. Every account. Every contract. Every person who knew and said nothing. All of it, a long moment. Your father's call to make," Briggs said. She looked toward the gate. Her father had stopped walking toward the tree line. He was standing in the space between the fence and the open ground. Something in his posture had shifted. The way someone's posture shifts when they have heard something and understood it and are making a decision. He turned around and walked back toward the gate, toward Pruitt. Not because Briggs directed him, not because anyone told him to, because James Callahan made the same calculation his daughter had made in the dark and arrived at the same place. Some things were worth more as evidence than as endings. He walked back toward the man who had made 38 months of his life a 10 by 12 room. And Nora started moving again across the field toward the gate. James Callahan reached the gate at approximately the same moment as the man he had known for 11 years. They stood on opposite sides of a fence that had been built specifically to keep one of them on the inside, and was no longer doing that. Silence between them was complete and dense. Not the silence of two people who have nothing to say. The silence of two people for whom what exists between them is too large and too specific to begin with ordinary language. 38 months, 11 years. Every conversation they had ever had, every mission, every meal, every moment of the kind of trust that develops between people who do difficult things together in difficult places. All of that was in the silence. And what Pruitt had done with it was in the silence too. Pruitt looked at James Callahan standing in the cold Pennsylvania night, thinner, white-haired. Changed in the ways that 38 months of that kind of room change you. And also, unmistakably, himself. Completely himself. Which was... Pruitt looked at that and felt something he was not going to examine. James looked at him for a long time. "It's already out, Reg," James said. His voice was quiet. The voice of a man who has become, over 38 months of having nothing to do but think and decide and hold his own center, very certain of very few things, and is now using one of them. 3 journalists, 2 Senate offices, Eastern District Prosecutor, delivered before we came through that fence. Whether we got out or not, he paused. "That's not a threat. It's information. Your only move right now is the one I'm offering." Pruitt was very still. "What are you offering?" he said. And his voice was not what it had been before. Something had left it. "The particular quality of a man who believes he is too large to be touched, cooperate," James said. "Everything. Every name. Every account number. Every contract. Everyone who received something and everyone who looked the other way to make it possible. You become the man who came forward. Which is the only version of this story where you are a man who made a decision instead of a man who got caught." He was quiet for a moment. The difference between spending the rest of your life explaining yourself to one prosecutor or spending it explaining yourself to everyone. Pruitt looked at the facility behind him, at the fence, at the open field, at the tree line where, he could feel it, in the geometry of the situation, something was watching from the dark with absolute steadiness. He looked at James, at the white hair, at the face that had been changed by 38 months of what Pruitt had made of those 38 months. James said, quieter, "The way you speak to someone when you are simply saying it, Reg. It's over." Reginald Pruitt, Deputy Director of CIA Operations, who had built an architecture of plausible deniability so carefully constructed that it had remained intact for 6 years, who had required the convergence of a retired Master Chief. A 41-year-old former signals analyst in a cracked lens cardigan, and one 27-year-old woman with no official record in the shot pattern of someone who had been given a very specific inheritance. He said, "Okay, not defeat, not relief, not remorse. Just the sound of a man who has run every available calculation and found that they all terminate in the same place." "Okay," he said again. "Everything," James said. "Everything," Pruitt said. Nora reached the gate. She stood on the other side of the fence and looked at her father through the chain link. The whiter hair, the changed face, the angles of 38 months written into a person who had decided every morning to keep standing straight. and he looked at her through the fence, and she thought, "We are getting out of this parking lot right now, or I am going to lose the 17 things I have been holding together for 29 months. "We're leaving," she said. Simply. The way you say things when the simplest version is the only one available. Now, both of you. On this side of the fence, Briggs had the gate. They left. She walked beside her father through the open ground toward the tree line. She had her hand on his arm, not holding him up. He didn't need that, just maintaining contact. Specific contact of someone who has been looking for someone for 29 months and has found them and needs the physical confirmation to be ongoing and present and uninterrupted. He let her. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't pull away. He walked through the cold Pennsylvania field with his daughter's hand on his arm, and he breathed the outdoor air that was different from the sublevel air, and he noted, with the part of him that never entirely stopped noting things, that the northeast tree line offered better cover than the western approach, and that the vehicle on the county road half a mile south was Teddy's, and that the operational plan had been sound and well executed, and there were 2 or 3 things he would have done differently that he was going to keep to himself for a significant period of time. Because she had done it. She had done the thing. She had built a plan from almost nothing and executed it against a facility designed to be invisible, and had made a decision in the dark at 400 meters that had been the hardest decision available to her, and had made it correctly. He didn't know all the details yet. He was going to want all the details eventually, but he knew the essential facts. She had found him, and he was walking out of a Pennsylvania field beside her, with his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm, which was enough. Which was, as a matter of fact, more than enough. Teddy's vehicle pulled onto the access road as they reached the tree line. Briggs had Pruitt and his remaining security detail behind him, secured, cooperative, particular compliance of people who understand that the situation has fully resolved in a direction they did not anticipate. Pruitt looked, as he got into the vehicle ahead of them, like a man who has been extraordinarily arrogant for a very long time, and has arrived at the specific moment where the arrogance meets its accounting. He looked like arithmetic. She thought she should feel more about seeing him, more specific anger, more of the volcanic thing. She felt only tired and present, entirely focused on the hand of the man beside her, and the way he was breathing the outdoor air in the Pennsylvania night that was beginning, at its very edges, to lighten toward the earliest possibility of dawn. "You're going to want to eat something," she said. "Probably," he agreed. "Teddy packed sandwiches." He looked at her. "Teddy packed sandwiches," he said. "She's very organized," Nora said. He looked toward the vehicle. At the outline of Teddy Winslow visible through the window, already on her laptop, already doing the next thing, apparently, he said. "You'll like her," Nora said. "I expect I will," he said. They reached the vehicle. Briggs had the gate. They left. 5 weeks, Montana. The same ridge, the same granite, the same valley dropping 1,200 feet below, and the same opposing ridge where a steel plate used to stand before she had gone back the week after everything ended and collected it. It was on the wall of the cabin now, not as a trophy, as evidence that something had happened here that mattered and that it was permissible to keep a small physical record of it. Morning. Clear. High 30s. The kind of day that is cold but not punishing. Feels like an apology from a winter that went on too long and has finally decided to relent. She sat on the granite. Her father sat beside her, 5 weeks out of Facility 9. Still thin, though less than before. 5 weeks of actual food had begun to change the angles of his face back toward something she recognized more completely. Still white-haired, which he would be permanently. Still carrying in the structure of his face the particular evidence of 38 months of that room and that decision every morning. He was in the beginning of what would be a long process. Debriefings, medical evaluations, legal proceedings moving at the pace of institutional machinery, which is not the pace of actual human need. The case against Pruitt was already generating its own gravity. 3 journalists and 2 Senate offices and 1 federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia were not an insignificant thing to have pointed at a man's architecture, and the architecture had been built by a man who had not planned for backup. Arrogance as a structural flaw, Teddy was involved in that process and would be for a long time. She had testified once already and would testify again. She had delivered additional files and had done so in a way that was meticulous and well-sourced and would be difficult to challenge. She was extraordinarily good at that kind of thing. Harlan Voss had not been found. Whatever calculation he had made, to warn Pruitt and let the transfer complete. She had thought about that calculation many times in 5 weeks and still didn't fully understand it. Maybe she wasn't supposed to. Maybe some calculations belonged to the person who made them. Today was not the process. Today was this ridge and this morning and 2 people sitting on granite in the early light. She had planned what she would say when she finally had the time to say it. All of it. 29 months of held things. 6 iterations. Multiple variables. She had said almost none of it, because when Briggs had brought her father up the trail from the cabin below, and James Callahan had stepped onto the granite and turned around and looked at her, the planning had become entirely irrelevant. Not because the things she'd planned to say weren't true, because they were true in a way that didn't require language right now. The moment was already carrying everything. He was her father. Completely. In every particular and every changed thing, and every piece of 38 months that was written into him. All of it was still him. She had stepped forward and put her arms around him, and he had put his arms around her, and she had heard, felt, him exhale. One long, complete breath from somewhere very deep, the breath of something that has been held for 38 months being allowed to stop. Like a door that has been braced shut for that long has finally been permitted to open. They had stood like that. Nobody had said anything. Until James put his hand on the back of her head the way he had when she was 9 years old, and the rifle was larger than she was, and he was showing her how to hold it, and she had been afraid of it, and he had known she was afraid and had stood right there, so she wouldn't have to be afraid alone. "I heard it," he had said, "the shot you didn't take," and she had pulled back enough to look at him. "I know what you had," he had said, "and I know what you chose." She had held on to that. The fact of being known by someone, specific weight of being understood by the one person whose understanding of a particular thing mattered most. "I need you to know," she had said. "I wasn't afraid, I know you weren't," he had said. "That's not why you didn't take it." "No," she had said. "It's not." He had nodded, slowly. The nod of recognition. "Good," he had said. "That's exactly right." Now, 5 weeks later, Briggs came up over the ridge edge and sat down on the granite a few feet from them and pulled his jacket tighter against the morning cold. He had brought 3 metal cups of coffee from the cabin. Handed them out without ceremony. They drank and looked at the morning doing what mornings do when you are finally in a place where you can let them happen around you, without tracking them for danger. "Teddy called," Briggs said. James looked at him. "She testified again yesterday. The Eastern District Prosecutor thinks the iron veil structure is going to take 18 months to fully document and prosecute. She's fine with that." He paused. "She said to tell you both that the accounting will be thorough. She wanted you to know that specifically." James nodded. The nod of a man who has thought about justice for 38 months and has become realistic about what it looks like when it actually arrives. Slower than you want, more complicated than you imagine, but present. "Warren Delacroix." Nora said. A pause. "Still looking," Briggs said. "There are people looking. People with resources and reasons." He looked at his coffee. He made a decision to say something when he could have said nothing. That kind of decision has people who want to honor it. She thought about Warren Delacroix. About 4 words sent into a phone at some cost to himself that she would never fully know. About what it takes to send 4 words, when the sending of them means you have drawn a line, that someone on the other side of a lot of institutional power will notice. When the sending of them makes you visible in a way you have, until that moment, carefully avoided being visible. He had sent them anyway. He didn't die there. He had been right. And because he had been right, and because he had said so, her father was sitting on a granite ridge in Montana, drinking bad coffee and occasionally almost smiling. She thought about what she owed him. Not abstractly, specifically. She thought about what it meant to be the beneficiary of someone else's courage and what that required of you in return. And she thought that what it required was not gratitude. Gratitude was too small and too passive for what this was, but action. The commitment to keep looking, to use whatever was built from this toward finding the people who had been made to disappear by the same architecture that had taken her father, and to work toward making the same accounting happen for them. She was going to do that. Not today. Today was this ridge and this morning, and her father's arm around her, and Briggs on the granite 3 feet over with his terrible coffee, and the valley below doing what valleys do in early spring when the light arrives all at once. But she was going to do it. She was making the commitment now in this morning with the rifle across her knees and the 4 words visible on the stock. Because some commitments you make in operational moments and some you make in quiet ones, and the quiet ones are sometimes the ones that hold the longest. She looked at the 4 words one final time. The rifle remembers what the records forgot. Yes, it did. James looked at the valley for a long moment. What happens now, he said. Not about the case. Something else. Nora looked at the valley now. She said, you eat actual food for a while and let someone look at the things the doctors want to look at. And I stay for a while because I've been moving for 11 days, and I could use a reason to stop moving. He looked at her. And then, she said, we figure out the rest of it as we go. He looked at the valley for a long moment. I need to see your shot data, he said, from the last 3 years. I want to see how you've been adjusting. She stared at him. You've been held in a facility in Pennsylvania for 38 months, she said. And you want to review my data. I've had a lot of time to think about technique, he said. Briggs made a sound that was almost a laugh. The closest she had heard him get to one. She looked at her father, at the white hair and the changed face and the eyes that were exactly what she had been carrying inside her for 29 months. The eyes that were right now doing the specific thing his eyes did when he was serious about something, and also being slightly deliberately difficult about it. She knew those eyes. She had missed those eyes. Fine, she said. I'll show you the data, and you can tell me what I've been doing wrong. You've probably been doing a lot right, he said. Knowing you, probably, she agreed. Show me anyway where I can do better. He put his arm around her. They sat like that and looked at the morning for a while. Above them, the sky completed its transition from gold to the clear blue of a Montana spring morning. Below them, the valley held the light the way valleys do at that hour, all at once, completely, without reservation. The wind came through and moved the branches in the tree line below in its long, unhurried waves. Briggs finished his coffee and looked at the valley and the sky and the 2 people on the granite in front of him and thought about a message sent to his encrypted relay. 12 days before a young woman arrived on a mountain ridge. She's coming. Show her the rifle. Still didn't know who had sent it. He had continued to not know for 5 weeks. He had decided to continue to not know because whoever had sent it had been right about what was needed and had trusted him to do his part, and he had done it. Sometimes that was enough, and the rest was someone else's to hold. The rifle was on Nora's knees. She looked at the 4 words on the stock one more time. The rifle remembers what the records forgot. She was the rifle. She was the memory. She had done the last 5% of the work. 3 times over, and the morning kept arriving, the way mornings do when you finally have a reason to let them. She put her hand on her father's arm. He looked at her. Dad, she said. Yeah, he said. I'm glad I drove faster. He looked at her for a moment, at the person she was. Complete and clear and entirely herself. Me too, kid, he said. He put his arm around her. Me too. The rifle lay across her knees, and it remembered all of it, every decision. Exact shape, and so did she.